I didn't expect much when I walked into the church that day. Just a quiet moment, a quick confession, and out. But I left changed. Not because someone gave me a perfect answer or waved a magic wand, but because I told the truth for the first time in a long time. Have you ever kept something hidden so deep inside, even your prayers felt hollow? Have you ever smiled on the outside while your soul screamed for help? Have you ever needed someone, anyone, to just hear you, not fix you? This is a story about that moment. Not a grand sermon, not a theology lesson, just what happened when grace met me in the rawest part of my life. I had grown up with the sacraments, baptism, communion, even confirmation, but somewhere along the line, confession became just a word, a box you check, a ritual you do when you feel guilty. I didn't hate it, I just stopped believing it mattered, until my life started unraveling. It wasn't one dramatic thing, more like a slow erosion. A few bad choices, a few lies, a few nights spent numbing what I couldn't face. You wake up one day and wonder how you got so far from the person you thought you'd be. People still thought I had it together, but inside, I was exhausted. Spiritually, emotionally, even physically. I remember scrolling social media one night and seeing this quote, "Confession isn't where you go to be punished, it's where you go to be healed." I don't know why, but it hit something in me. I didn't want to be punished, I didn't want to be judged, I just wanted to be okay again. So I went to church that Saturday, not because I felt holy, not because I was brave, I just couldn't carry it anymore. I sat in the back pew for a long time, I thought about leaving. I kept rehearsing what I'd say. I kept hearing all the reasons why it wouldn't work. You haven't been in years, you're just being dramatic, this won't change anything. But somehow I walked in. The confessional wasn't fancy. The priest wasn't glowing with light. He was just there, kind, quiet, human. I stumbled through my words. I cried, I paused, I told the truth. Not the polished church version, the actual truth. And then came the words I didn't know I needed. God has already been waiting to forgive you. He didn't shame me. He didn't list consequences. He listened. He offered absolution. And in that moment, something lifted. It wasn't all fireworks and choirs singing. It was more like a deep exhale. Like when you've been holding your breath so long, you forget what breathing feels like. I walked out of that church lighter. Not perfect, but different. People ask me now if confession really changed me. Here's what I say. It reminded me who I am, not who I pretend to be, not what my mistakes say, who I actually am, a beloved soul still wanted by God. Since then, confession hasn't become a chore. It's become a lifeline, a sacred space where I get to be honest and still loved, where shame is met with mercy, where weakness is met with grace. I know there are people who had bad experiences with confession. Maybe you felt judged. Maybe it felt cold or scripted. Maybe it was used as a weapon instead of a healing balm. And I'm sorry for that, truly. But that's not what it was meant to be. The beauty of this sacrament is that it doesn't depend on our eloquence. You don't need the right words, you just need the courage to be real. Confession isn't about reliving shame, it's about releasing it, letting it go, naming what hurts so God can touch it. I think we forget that we're not just bodies and minds, we're souls. And when your soul is wounded, you need something deeper than a pep talk. You need sacramental grace. You need someone to stand in the place of Christ and say, "You are forgiven." That moment changed how I saw God. I had always imagined him as distant, mildly disappointed, waiting for me to shape up. But in that confessional, I met the God who runs toward the prodigal, who rejoices more over one sinner who returns than 99 who never strayed. There was no lightning bolt, no booming voice, just a quiet miracle. And sometimes that's the most powerful kind. Since then, I've talked to friends who've been afraid to go back. They say I've messed up too much, I don't even know where to start. What if I cry? To all of them, I say the same thing. Go anyway. Cry if you need to. Stumble through your words. Just show up. Because God doesn't need perfection. He just wants your permission. To heal you, to hold you, to remind you that you're still his. I've gone to confession with joy, with fear, with anger, even with numbness. And every single time, grace has met me there. Sometimes loud, sometimes silent, but always real. And no matter how far I fall, I know there's a place I can return to. A place where the truth won't break me, it'll set me free. So if you're watching this, wondering if it's worth it, it is. If you've been carrying something heavy, you don't have to. If you've been running, it's okay to stop. God's not surprised by your struggle. He's not tired of forgiving you. He's just waiting, with open arms, with healing hands, with mercy that never runs out. Next time, I'll share more about how confession started transforming not just my inner world, but my relationships, my prayer life, even how I saw myself. But for now, let me say this. Confession didn't just help me. It saved me, and it can change everything for you too. I didn't tell anyone for days. I carried the moment quietly, like a fragile secret. Not because I was ashamed, but because it felt sacred, too personal to explain, too beautiful to reduce to a casual conversation. When something holy touches your soul, there's a silence that follows, a peace that asks to be held, not talked over. But something had shifted. People around me noticed I was calmer, a bit more present. One friend even said, "You seem lighter." I smiled and nodded, but the words wouldn't come yet. How do you explain to someone that you feel forgiven, not just in theory, but in your bones? I started noticing small things changing. My prayer life wasn't a checklist anymore. It became more like a dialogue, less scripted, more sincere. I didn't always have the right words, but I showed up. And I think that's what God wanted all along, my presence, not my perfection. Before that confession, I often felt like I had to fix myself before I could go to God. But now I knew the opposite was true. I needed God precisely because I couldn't fix myself. That realization was freeing. It gave me permission to be in process, not ashamed of it. I started going to confession more regularly, not out of guilt, but gratitude. It became a rhythm, like spiritual breathing, a time to pause, reflect, be honest, and begin again. I still stumbled, still sinned, still wrestled with things I thought I'd already overcome. But now I had a place to go with all of it, and I knew I wouldn't be turned away. There was one confession that especially stands out. I had messed up again, in a way that felt so frustratingly familiar. I almost didn't go. I thought, God must be tired of hearing this by now. But I went anyway. Sat down, confessed it, and waited for judgment. But the priest said something I'll never forget. Every time you come back, it's an act of love. Don't ever think God is tired of you. He rejoices each time. That broke something open in me. I had always imagined God as distant and serious, but now I saw him as the father who runs to his child, again and again, arms wide, heart open. I started to see confession not just as a place of forgiveness, but as a place of encounter. A place where God meets us in our mess and doesn't flinch. Where grace isn't a vague idea, it's a lived reality. A gift handed to us again and again, no matter how many times we fall. People outside the church sometimes ask, why not just confess directly to God? Why go to a priest? It's a fair question, but for me there's something profoundly healing about speaking it out loud to another human being, someone who represents Christ, who can speak the words I long to hear but can't say to myself, "You are forgiven, go in peace." It's not about the priest being perfect, it's about the sacrament being real, tangible, sacramental, a channel of grace that doesn't rely on our feelings but on God's promise. And yes, sometimes I've gone and not felt anything dramatic. Sometimes it's quiet, sometimes awkward, sometimes I leave still wrestling, but always the grace is there, working silently, like seeds in soil, hidden but alive. Confession has taught me that healing isn't always a lightning bolt. It's often a slow unfolding, a journey. And like all journeys, it requires returning, again and again. Not because we're failing, but because we're growing. I started noticing how this rhythm began to impact the rest of my life. I became quicker to forgive others, quicker to admit when I was wrong, more patient with myself and with those around me. Confession wasn't just changing how I related to God, it was changing how I related to people. Because once you experience mercy, real mercy, it's hard to keep it to yourself. You start to become a vessel for it. Not because you're better than others, but because you remember what it feels like to be broken and held. That's what grace does. It humbles you, then lifts you. It shows you the truth, not to shame you, but to set you free. I've had conversations with friends who are afraid to go. They think they'll be judged, exposed, made to feel worse. But what I always say is this: if you find the right priest, a gentle one, a wise one, you will encounter the gentleness of Christ. You will be reminded that your story doesn't end in failure. It begins again in mercy. One friend finally decided to go after years away. When she came back, she called me and said, "I didn't know how much I needed this until it was done. I feel like I can breathe again." That's the thing about confession. It gives you space to breathe, space to tell the truth without fear, space to be known and loved in the same moment. I've cried in confession. I've laughed, I've sat in silence, and every time I've walked out knowing this: I am not the sum of my failures. I am a child of God on a journey home. And you are too. If you've been avoiding confession, if you've been scared or ashamed or just unsure, I get it. I've been there. But let me say what I wish someone had said to me years ago. You are not too far gone. You are not too broken. You are not too late. Grace is waiting. Healing is real. Forgiveness isn't a theory. It's a door you can walk through. And behind that door is a God who already knows everything and still chooses you. There's a unique kind of silence that follows a good confession. It's not empty or awkward. It's full. It's a silence that breathes, that holds you, that says you don't have to carry this anymore. I remember sitting on a bench outside the church afterward, the air feeling different. Not because the world had changed, but because I had. I had let go of the noise inside me. But let me be honest, it's not always that clear-cut. Sometimes you go into the confessional feeling lost, and you walk out, still unsure. You don't always get clarity or peace right away. Sometimes all you get is a whisper in your spirit that says, "Keep coming." And that whisper is enough to take the next step. That's the beauty of the sacrament. It's not a transaction, it's a relationship. You're not earning grace, you're receiving it. And over time it transforms how you see yourself. It strips away the lies. You're not worthy. You'll never change. You've gone too far. And it replaces them with something deeper. You are loved. You are being made new. You are not alone. I think that's what makes confession so powerful. It reminds you that sin isn't your identity. Failure isn't the final word. In a culture that constantly tells us to hide our flaws, the sacrament invites us to bring them into the light. Not to be condemned, but to be healed. I remember once confessing something that had weighed on me for years. Something I had buried so deep, I had almost convinced myself it didn't matter anymore. But the moment I spoke it aloud, something cracked open inside me. It wasn't just about getting absolution, it was about releasing shame that had taken root in my heart. The priest didn't react with shock. He didn't scold me or make me feel small. He just listened, patiently. And when he finally spoke, he said, "Thank you for trusting God enough to bring this here. This is where freedom begins." That moment changed me. We live in a world that's good at performing, but not so good at healing. We're taught to curate our image, manage our brand, show strength. But confession calls us to something more real, to admit where we're weak, not to shame us, but to anchor us in grace. When I started going more regularly, I began noticing how it wasn't just about sin anymore. It became a place to reflect, to pause, to ask God, where have I drifted from you this week? Where have I chosen fear instead of trust? What part of me needs your mercy most right now? It made me more sensitive, not just to my actions, but to my heart. It's easy to confess the big stuff, but the little things, resentment, impatience, pride, they sneak in slowly, and they can harden us if we don't pay attention. That's why confession isn't just for when things fall apart. It's also for maintenance, for soul care, like spiritual housekeeping. Not glamorous, but necessary. Because if we don't tend to our hearts, we'll start living on autopilot, and we'll mistake numbness for peace. One of the most unexpected gifts of confession is that it helped me reconnect with compassion, not just for myself, but for others. When you realize how often you need mercy, it makes you slower to judge, slower to condemn, quicker to extend grace. I found myself becoming more honest in my relationships, more willing to say I'm sorry and mean it, more willing to forgive, even when it's hard. Confession wasn't just transforming my private faith, it was reshaping how I lived publicly. It also helped me understand something crucial. Repentance isn't self-hatred. It's not about beating yourself up, it's about turning back toward love. It's about choosing the light over the shadows. Not because God is waiting to punish you, but because He's waiting to welcome you. And when you begin to understand that, confession stops feeling like a courtroom and starts feeling like home. I remember a priest once told me, the confessional isn't a place where sinners go to be scolded. It's a place where children come to be embraced by their father. That changed everything for me, because I had spent so long trying to prove I was good enough, trying to get it all right. But grace doesn't wait for perfection. It meets you in your brokenness and begins its work there. If you've been away from confession for a long time, I want you to hear this. You don't have to have the perfect words. You don't have to remember every detail. Just come. God already knows your heart. The sacrament is His way of touching it. And if you're scared, that's okay. Bring the fear, bring the doubt, bring the mess. God can handle all of it. He's not waiting for a cleaned up version of you. He's waiting for the real you. Because at the end of the day, confession isn't about us getting everything right. It's about encountering the one who already has. It's not about rehearsing guilt. It's about remembering grace. There's a quiet power in being known, in being honest, in saying, "Here I am, Lord, still struggling, but still coming." And there's no shame in that, only courage. The kind of courage that cracks open the heart and lets the light in, and the light, once it enters, never stops healing. After a while, something in me shifted. Confession wasn't just something I had to do, it became something I wanted to do. Not out of guilt or pressure, but out of this quiet longing to be real with God. In a world full of noise, filters, and performance, there's something profoundly healing about a space where you can drop the act and be fully seen, without fear of rejection. I started to notice how my heart softened over time. I became more aware of the way little choices built up, how unchecked frustrations could grow into bitterness, how subtle pride could disguise itself as self-protection, and how easily I could fall into routines without really checking in with my soul. The confessional wasn't a place of shame anymore, it was a checkpoint for grace. The more I brought these parts of myself into the light, the more I realized I didn't have to be afraid of what God would see. He already knew, and still, He welcomed me. The priest's voice wasn't harsh, it wasn't clinical, it was human, gentle, sincere. And when he spoke the words of absolution, something in me exhaled. Not because the words were magic, but because they carried the full weight of mercy. And mercy makes room for new beginnings. I think that's what I didn't understand for a long time. I thought confession was about reciting a checklist of wrongs. But it's deeper than that. It's about relationship. It's about saying, "God, I want to be closer to you, but there are things in me that keep getting in the way." And instead of condemnation, what you receive is invitation. Come closer. Start again. You're still mine. There's a line I once heard that I'll never forget. The only sin God can't forgive is the one we refuse to give Him. That struck me, not because God's grace has limits, but because we do. We're the ones who hold on, who hide, who think we need to fix ourselves first. But confession is the opposite. It's the place where healing starts, not where perfection is required. I remember walking into confession one day completely exhausted, spiritually dry, emotionally scattered. I didn't feel anything. No tears, no emotion, not even clarity. Just fatigue. But I confessed anyway. I spoke the words anyway. And after absolution, I still didn't feel much. But later that evening, while folding laundry, a quiet peace came over me. It was so gentle, I almost missed it. But it was there. And I realized then, grace doesn't always announce itself loudly. Sometimes it just settles into the corners of your soul and begins rebuilding you from within. That's why I keep going back. Because I need that rebuilding, regularly. Because even when I think I'm doing okay, there are things I don't see, patterns I fall into, wounds I carry, fears I ignore. And confession isn't just about sin, it's about clarity, about coming face to face with who you are and remembering whose you are. There's a humility in that process, but also freedom. When you confess just letting go of sin, you're making space. Space for grace, space for peace, space for the Spirit to move in ways that shame never could. And maybe the most beautiful part of it all is this: you're never alone. In the silence of that small room, you're accompanied, not just by the priest, but by the presence of Christ Himself. He's not standing there with arms crossed, waiting to scold. He's kneeling beside you, holding your burden, whispering, "Let me carry this now." That image has stayed with me, especially during the weeks when I feel too tired to pray, too distracted to focus, too broken to believe. Because confession isn't about how I feel, it's about what God does. It's about grace moving beneath the surface, even when I don't see it, even when I don't feel it, even when my faith feels paper thin. There's a quiet courage in showing up anyway, in saying, "Here I am, Lord," not with strength, but with surrender. And God meets you there, every time. Confession has taught me to see others differently too, to recognize that everyone is carrying something, that we all need grace, that holiness isn't about having a perfect record, it's about having a humble heart, a heart that says, "I need help, I need healing, I need you." In a world obsessed with self-sufficiency, confession is a radical act. It's saying, "I can't do this alone, and I don't have to." It's reclaiming our dependence on divine mercy, not as weakness, but as strength, because it takes strength to be honest, to bring your darkness into the light, to choose forgiveness over fear. And the more I live in that truth, the more I see how confession doesn't just change my soul, it changes my life. I speak more gently, I listen more fully, I forgive more freely, not because I've mastered some virtue, but because I've tasted mercy. And once you've tasted it, you can't help but want others to experience it too. So if you're carrying something heavy today, something unspoken, something hidden, this is your invitation, not to perform, not to pretend, just to come. Come and let grace do what only grace can, because there is no wound too deep, no past too dark, no failure too final, only a God whose love goes deeper still. There was a moment after one particular confession that I still think about often. I didn't go in with anything dramatic, no catastrophic failure, no major crisis, just a slow accumulation of small things. Impatience, unspoken resentment, a harsh word I hadn't bothered to apologize for, the kind of things that hide beneath the surface but quietly corrode the soul. I spoke them one by one, slowly, honestly, and then came the silence, that quiet space right before the priest speaks. And instead of judgment or theology, he just said, "Thank you for being honest." It stopped me, not because the words were profound, but because they were human. And in that moment, I didn't feel like a problem to be fixed. I felt like a person to be loved. That's the power of confession. It rehumanizes you. In a world where failure is mocked, where weakness is seen as a flaw, this sacrament says the opposite. It tells you that weakness is the very place where God meets you, that sin doesn't disqualify you from grace, it's the very reason grace exists. Over time, I noticed something unexpected. Going to confession didn't just change how I saw myself, it changed how I treated others. When you begin to confront your own pride, your own pettiness, your own hidden wounds, you become gentler with other people's struggles. You stop expecting perfection from them because you've learned to stop demanding it from yourself. You start to see people not through the lens of judgment, but through the lens of shared need, for mercy, for healing, for love. And perhaps that's the point. Confession isn't just for your soul, it's for your relationships, your marriage, your friendships, your family. Because when you leave the confessional lighter, you carry less into the spaces you inhabit, less baggage, less bitterness, more room for kindness. I also began to see how confession intersects with mental and emotional healing. It's not therapy, though it can complement it. But there's something deeply therapeutic about saying things out loud, about owning your actions, about receiving forgiveness in a tangible, sacramental way. Sometimes grace shows up in silence. Other times, it arrives wrapped in words, spoken softly by someone standing in the place of Christ. There was one afternoon when I almost didn't go. I had made the appointment, but the day got away from me. I felt tired, spiritually numb. But because I think there are people who want to believe, who need to know that it's okay to start again, that broken doesn't mean abandoned, that failure doesn't mean forgotten, that God isn't waiting to punish, but to embrace. The first few times I went to confession, I expected formality. I braced myself for correction, but what I found instead was welcome. Mercy that didn't minimize my sin, but didn't define me by it either. A mercy that saw the whole of me, past, present, future, and still said, "You are worth redeeming." Now when I kneel down, it's not out of fear, it's out of hope. Because I know what's waiting on the other side of those words. Not punishment, but peace. Sometimes it's immediate. Sometimes it unfolds slowly over days, but it always comes. Because grace isn't just a theory, it's a person. And he shows up in the silence, in the words, in the act of returning. One of the most beautiful things I've learned is that God doesn't just forgive, He forgets. He doesn't hold our sins in a ledger. He doesn't bring them up later to shame us. Once confessed, they're gone, as far as the east is from the west. And that freedom, it's real. It's why I keep going back, even when I feel spiritually dry, even when I don't feel forgiven. Because it's not about feeling, it's about trust. Trust that what God says is true, that His mercy is greater than my mess. That the cross wasn't just a moment, it was a movement, one that reaches across time and into this very moment, offering healing again and again. So if you're hesitating, if you've been away, if you're not sure if it's worth it, this is your sign. Go, show up. Let grace do what only grace can. You don't need to have the perfect words. You don't need to have it all figured out. Just bring your heart. Because no matter how far you've wandered, no matter what you've done, no matter how long it's been, He's still waiting. And the door is still open. There's something sacred about the moment after you've confessed and the priest says, "Go in peace." It's not just a dismissal, it's a mission. An invitation to live differently, to love more deeply, to walk forward without dragging the weight of your past behind you. That's what the Sacrament of Reconciliation has become for me. Not a ritual of shame, but a rhythm of restoration. One of the most surprising lessons I've learned is this. You don't have to feel something dramatic for something real to be happening. There have been times I've walked out of the confessional and thought, well, that didn't feel profound. But then days later, I noticed I was less reactive with my family, more patient in traffic, more attentive in prayer. That's grace. Working quietly, almost invisibly, healing things you didn't even know were broken. And this journey of healing isn't just for me. I've watched friends come back to the church after decades because someone reminded them gently that mercy was still available. I've seen parents bring their children to confession, uncertain and nervous, and leave with tears in their eyes. Not because of fear, but because of relief. There's something deeply human about being seen in your weakness, and maybe you've never gone. Or maybe it's been years. Maybe you think it's too late, that you've made too many mistakes, that you wouldn't even know what to say. Can I tell you something? You don't have to say it perfectly. Just come honestly. Come with your weariness, your doubts, your broken pieces. Because God doesn't need perfection, He just needs permission. Permission to enter, to heal, to forgive, and to restore what sin tried to steal. The world will tell you to hide your flaws, to protect your image. But the gospel says the opposite. It says, "Blessed are the poor in spirit." It says those who humble themselves will be exalted. Confession is where that upside-down kingdom becomes real, where the last become first, where the lost become found. If you've been struggling, if you feel distant from God, if you wonder whether you'll ever feel close to Him again, try this. Go to confession. Not as a checklist, but as a conversation. Let it be the start of something new. You don't need to feel holy to return. You just need to be honest, and God will meet you right there. This is more than a tradition. It's a lifeline, a sacred gift that's been handed down for centuries because humanity hasn't changed. We're still in need of grace, still in need of healing, still in need of a Savior who doesn't turn away from sinners but runs toward them. So what about you? If something in this story stirred something in your heart, don't ignore it. Take that next step. Whether it's making an appointment, walking into a confessional for the first time in years, or just whispering a prayer in your room, begin. Let grace begin again in you. And if this video has resonated with you, I want to invite you to be part of this journey with us. At Think Fresh Daily, we don't just talk about faith, we live it. We share stories that challenge, encourage, and heal. Stories like yours, stories like mine. Stories that remind us that even when we're broken, we are never beyond repair. So please, follow the channel. Share this video with someone who might need it. Leave a comment if you've experienced the mercy of confession in your own life. Your story could be the very thing that leads someone else home. God is not done with you, He's just getting started. And the next chapter? It begins with grace.